they'd come to Peru, they'd build the wind turbine with us, and then we'd go and install it. So we need to know whether it's possible, whether it's safe, can we get there, and consider from a volunteer's point of view, would you want to go to this community? Is it something that you're going to want to pay? Now it's $2,750 for 5 weeks. Would you want to pay that much money to help a community? And if you think the answer is no, then maybe you wouldn't consider that as a good location. There's a few places that would have been perfect for everything apart from hosting volunteers, because it's just not safe in the region, or it's cold and exposed, and living for a week in a mountain community with no electricity is pretty tough. You couldn't do it for 2 weeks in a row, you need a few days when you got back afterwards. So you do have to consider what it's going to be like to live there for a week. And then the last point is just you have to walk around and find out where in the community to put a wind turbine. This is a nice, simple, superimposed picture of a wind turbine. Just here. Basically get people, once we find a location in the community, tell them where the wind turbine is going to go, and just get them to stand in the places of the turbine and the anchors, and then we can build this up. If the community's never seen a wind turbine before, they can't envisage what it's going to look like. So this is a nice way of showing people where it's going to go, what it might look like when it's done, and also helps us prepare plans for foundations and everything like that. And finding the right site for a wind turbine is probably one of the most important things when visiting community. It needs to be within a certain distance of whatever you're providing electricity for, and in a place with wind. If you get this wrong, then you're almost wasting your time with the whole project. Okay. The next part is actually starting the project. So you have a list of communities that you've been made aware of and you visited, and obviously we create a list. So as a quick example, these are the 11 communities that were considered for projects with wind aid for this year. We visited all of them, and we considered that they'd work for hosting volunteers for everything. And so we only had 5 projects funded, so we could only choose 5 of them. And as I said before, the amount of wind they have is not a consideration when choosing which ones to work with. Of the communities, actually the projects were from July to December. So the project that we chose in May, which is Roosevelt School, they actually raised the money to fund the turbine themselves. So we added that as an extra project. There were no volunteers with us, so I went and did it myself, on my own. But it meant we got another project going, another turbine installed, and it didn't cost us any money. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But for the other 5 projects, it was quite important which one we chose. In July, we went to a community called Canyo, and when we went to visit it, there was another community next to it, about 20 minutes walkway, called Taxapata. And Canyo was, well, both communities were very well organised. The community had a good structure, good leadership. We could provide electricity for the school, and also it's close to another project we ran the year before. So people in those communities could talk to each other, they could be a good support network, they could help each other out. The only problem was there's no road access, so to get to the community we had to walk for 2 hours from the road with the turbine. And that was a concern. It's at 4,000 metres altitude. If you ever walked at altitude before, it's very difficult, lack of oxygen. It's not an easy thing to do. But we decided that the only problem would be the volunteers, and for them to really appreciate what it's like being in a remote community with no electricity was to make them walk 2 hours with their backpacks at high altitude. And they loved it, so it worked out well. And we chose Canyo over Taxapata purely because Taxapata was another 20 minutes walk on. So if we went there, we'd have to walk past Canyo. So it seemed pointless doing a community further on, walking past another and neglecting it. So we decided that we'd work with Canyo, and then next year we'd work with Taxapata if everything went well. And it did, so next year Taxapata should get a wind turbine, and they've got the community of Canyo who can help with maintenance or any other issues. They know what it's been like to go through the whole process. Between Canyo and Taxapata and another community we did last year, the 3 communities can have their own support network for maintenance and troubleshooting, and they can share parts and skills and everything like that. So there's a little network of support in the communities, and then if they have a problem, they can come to us, because it's 2 days travel to get there. If there's an immediate problem, it's nice to have local people that can fix it rather than the NGO. In August, we had 2 projects, and we actually chose the community of La Florida and San Carlos. La Florida we chose because the US Peace Corps were involved. We had some volunteers that were our intermediary contacts. They're very well organised and reliable, and also more importantly, when we went to visit he's called the mayor. Basically, he's like the MP for the region. He's head of that region. He came to visit and was really interested in the project, and we worked out that if we did the project there, it was on his radar, and he was interested enough to fund other projects in that region if it went well. So it was basically a pilot project for a new region, and if we showed that it worked and it was a cost-effective option, then he'd consider funding projects in other communities. So we felt that doing this one project here would result in a lot more in the future. San Carlos was another community we visited that was well organised. Quilmomayo and El Pachique are both very close again, another half an hour on. And we again chose San Carlos because once we've done that one, we then can spread out and do the other two communities. In October, we chose a community called El Olivo, which last week it was installed. That was the health post, and again it was working with the US Peace Corps. The other two communities that we didn't work with this year, Marco Huamachuco and the Andean Alliance, all of the communities between July and October were in the Peruvian Andes, in the mountains. And because of the weather, you can only have access to those communities between May and October every year. So we only have 4 projects that we can actually do with communities in the mountains. And after that, the rest of the year we can't work with them because you don't have access. It's thunderstorms or rain and bad weather. It's just impractical to run a project there. So even though we had a lot of options for communities, there's only a certain window of time that you can actually run them in. So Marco Huamachuco and Andean Alliance were kicked back to next year. Marco Huamachuco would have been one of our first choices. It's considered one of the 7 wonders of Peru. It's like a historical site. The reason we said no was because our new president came into power in Peru in June, and he was bringing his whole new Ministry of Culture people, and so the people running this community knew they were losing their jobs in a few months, and it's a big no-no in Peru to do work for your successor to take the benefit from. So nobody wants to do anything, they just sat on their desks doing nothing for the last few months, because there's no point doing something good if your successor is going to take the credit. Sounds a bit odd, but that's just the way it works. And then in December, a community called Belisario was chosen because it's in the desert, it's warm weather, it's a good climate, and it was one of the only locations we had that we could go to in that time of year. Quickly, the financing. You can finance a project in lots of ways. You can get grants, fundraise, donations. A few social entrepreneurships are popping up. The idea is that you can make a profit, but your business is still socially responsible. WindAid as an organisation is classed as social entrepreneurship. It's quite complicated how the for-profit and not-profit work together. It doesn't always work, but it's what a lot of these organisations around the world are starting to do. Paid volunteer programs, which is what we did for all our development projects. Volunteers pay to volunteer with us, and their money funds everything for the projects, hosting them, buying materials. Capacity building, obviously you put a bit of money, you train people, and then with the turbines you make at first, you sell, and you just sell more and grow more. And then the last one is microfinance or financing. One option, more for the businesses, was that we went to the banks in Peru and just said, this turbine is worth this much money, it's got this much value in assets. So we would create a way for loans to be given against the wind turbine. A business buys a wind turbine on credit from the bank, installs it, and when they save money each month compared to using a diesel generator, they can repay back the cost of the loan for the turbine until they've bought the turbine out from the bank. If they don't pay it back, bank can take the turbine off them and sell it to someone else. And so it's, in a way, I suppose, microfinancing and financing, but it allows people to pay for a wind turbine in installments when a lot of them couldn't afford that upfront cost. Project planning, based on all the information you've collected from site visits and everything like that, you just put it on paper and put your schedules together, and that would lead to actually running the project, where in our case with WindAid, volunteers would build the wind turbines in the workshop over a period of 4 weeks. Normally there was 8 in a group, The community involvement in this kind of extends to they dig the foundation holes, they buy the cement and mix it to prepare the foundations. That was all their responsibility. They then helped with the installation when we were there, so they could learn and appreciate how it was put together and how it worked, so in the future they'd know how to fix it to a certain level. They would also host a volunteer group for the week, somewhere to sleep, provide with food, water, everything like that. So although they're not buying the wind turbine, their hosting of us and their labour adds some cost to the project, or adds some value, and that's how they contributed, so that it wasn't purely just a gift. And the main thing is, especially from a volunteer point of view, is that the project's not finished once you leave Peru, or you leave the country where you're working. Obviously the volunteers play a big role in funding and building the wind turbine, but a lot of work goes in before and a lot of work will go in afterwards. It's not a 5-week project, it's a 15 to 20 year project. So if something goes wrong during the 5 weeks and maybe you can't install the wind turbine, we would consider not installing it and not finishing it, because for wind aid it's more important that the project works long term than we satisfy a group of volunteers for a few weeks and neglect, I guess, the future of the project. And the last stage is just handing it over to the community. Due to, I guess, how the culture works in Peru, we'd just say thank you to everyone. People would make speeches and talk, and I guess there's an informal handing over the wind turbine from us having built it to the community, who now take responsibility and own it. This is just a picture of wind aid in the community in the mountains. Then on the final day they just prepared us lunch and had some beers, and it was just a day to celebrate the wind turbine going up. And also the whole community comes together, they get to meet the volunteers, talk to people from a different culture. The volunteers get to meet who they helped build the wind turbine for. It's a good way to integrate and learn about how it's helping people. We actually gave contracts with the communities to make it more formal, so both the NGO and the community knew what their responsibility was. So we actually said that Wind Aid owned the wind turbine. It was never given to a community. It was just lent to them for free. Even though we'd never take it away unless there was an extreme circumstance, technically Wind Aid would remain the owner. And that was so the community couldn't sell it after a few years if they needed a bit of money. We're not there to help their debts, we're there to provide them with electricity. So if they don't want it and they want to sell it, we'd rather give it to a community that does want it and does want the electricity. It's not nice saying not going to help a community if they need the money, but that's not what we do. However, the community can do whatever they want with the electricity. If they don't want to use it, they can sell it to everyone around their community and just generate an income from it if they wanted. We advise them on what they can use it for, lights, what appliances, machinery, but ultimately it's up to them. And once the wind turbine's been built and installed, the community is responsible for all the costs of it in the future. That means maintenance, replacement parts, paying for an engineer to come and visit, maybe buying new batteries after every few years. All of that is their responsibility. And as a result, we help them create a business plan or create businesses or ways to generate an income from the wind turbine so they can afford all these future costs. They're not allowed to make any changes to the wind turbine. Even though it's built with volunteers and it's a simple design, it's still a very dangerous piece of technology. So we don't want them playing around with it and maybe damaging it so it doesn't work in the future. And the last thing, which was added not at the start, but after a few volunteer projects through experiences, we state that the organisation of Wind Aid is not responsible for anything volunteers promise. We had a few projects where volunteers went to the community and they felt sorry for the community or wanted to help some way and provide things they didn't have, and they'd say, yeah, we'll send you some money for this or we'll help you buy that. The volunteers then leave Peru and go back home, and later the community, a member will come up to you and say, where's this TV? This person said you'd buy us. And then you're stuck in a problem with them expecting things from you, from what a volunteer at the time thought they could provide, and the volunteer's gone off and left you and doesn't plan on following through from what they said. So we just make it clear that we're here to provide you with electricity, this is what we're doing, anything else people can help, but that's not what we're involved with doing. We also train the community on how it works and how they can fix it, so they have the skills to repair it. anything more major or more serious, they can come to Wind Aid. So as much as possible, problems are solved in the community. And they should divide up tasks with who's responsible for looking after the electronics, who is supposed to sell the electricity for charging, who's meant to look after spare parts or fix the light bulbs or anything like that. So they have a proper committee and there's a structured way of how they run the management of the wind